All right. So before we start this, I'm going to answer a question that some people have asked me, and that is, what books should I be reading? And there's no one specific answer for that, but I can give you a general philosophy for how you should think about it. First off, ask, what are you reading for? For example, if you are a financial advisor, then you're just going to stick strictly to books that are in banking, taxes, economics, investments. But most people, they get into personal development because they want to become more well-rounded. And so in order to become more well-rounded, you usually want to start off easier and then get into the harder stuff later. And so you can look at the IQ per degree plan to understand this. So you type in on Google, what is the IQ, the average IQ for each degree? And what you'll see is social services is about a 105. And then you go up to business administration around a 110. Accounting is at about a 110. You go up a little bit farther, you've got biology is at about a 120. You go up a little bit farther and you've got economics at about 127. And then you go all the way to the top and you got philosophy and you got, physics. And the reason you do this is to layer knowledge on top of each other. And so you really have to be motivated to understand the world. And the reason why you start at the bottom is that's interpersonal relationships. So you say, all right, I'm ready to start my personal development path. Let me read about sociology, psychology, maybe theology with religion tied in there. Let me learn person to person interactions and how people interact with the universe. And then you go up a little bit farther and then you go maybe to business after you figured out interpersonal relationships. And you say, okay, how do businesses operate with each other? And then knowing what I know now about people, how do people fill the role of businesses? Okay, so now you're layering more and more on top of each other. And as you learn, you start to understand more. And so you go up and you start learning about biological sciences or physical sciences. And you say, how does the world work? What are some major things within the world? And then now you know about people, now you know about businesses. So you say, how do these biological phenomenons affect people? How do they affect businesses? And if you're learning about accounting and finance, which is about a 115 IQ, just below biological and physical sciences, you might ask, how do people make money through these sciences? And then you go up a little bit farther and you start to ask questions of philosophy about different thoughts from different uh, genius thinkers around the world. And then you start to piece together all of that information that you know into a more abstract thinking model. And you start to piece together all these different points of references, all this information into your own unique way of thinking of how you view the world. And so we're going to start off with chapter 2 of 12 rules for life. And in the first page, he talks about, well, first let me do a summary. He talks about theology. So he talks about religion, and that's going to help you to understand the beginning of the world and the beginning of people. And then at the end of it, he ends it off with a motivational speech. And so on page 31, says, imagine that 100 people are prescribed a drug. Consider what happens next. One-third of them won't fill the prescription. Half of the remaining 67 will fill it, but won't take the medication correctly. They'll miss doses. They'll quit taking it early. They might not even take it at all. Physicians and pharmacists tend to blame such patients for their non-compliance, inaction, and error. You can lead a horse to water, they reason. Psychologists tend to take a dim view of such judgments. We are trained to assume that the failures of patients to follow professional advice is the fault of the practitioner, not the patient. We believe the healthcare provider has a responsibility to proffer advice that will be followed, offer interventions that will be respected, plan with the patient or client until the desired result is achieved, and follow up to ensure that everything is going correctly. This is just one of the many things that make psychologists so wonderful. Of course, we have the luxury of time with our clients, unlike other more beleaguered professionals who wonder why sick people won't take their medication. What is wrong with them? Don't they want to get better? Now, the reason why I read that is it has a lot to do with personal development and professional development as well. You know, there are a lot of people who give advice and they want to occupy positions of power. They want to have authority over other people. But when you look at their personal life, you realize that they don't really take that good of care of themselves. And what Jordan Peterson is talking about here is to take care of yourself as if you are taking care of somebody else. Because a lot of us, we take better care of other people than we do of ourselves. And you will start to notice that you become more responsible. You start to grow up more when you start to take care of other people. And I'm going to explain throughout this chapter why that is. And it's really going to piece together. Here's something worse. Imagine that someone receives an organ transplant. Imagine it's a kidney. A transplant typically occurs only after a long period of anxious waiting on the part of the recipient. Only a minority of people donate organs when they die, and even fewer when they are still alive. Only a small number of donated organs are a good match for any hopeful recipient. This means that the typical kidney transplantee has been undergoing dialysis, the only alternative, for years. Dialysis involves passing all the patient's blood out of his or her body through a machine and back in. It is an unlikely and miraculous treatment, so that's all good, but it's not pleasant. It must happen 5 to 7 times a week for 8 hours a time. It should happen every time the patient sleeps. That's too much. No one wants to stay on dialysis. Now, one of the complications of transplantation is rejection. Your body does not like it when parts of someone else's body are stitched into it. Your immune system will attack and destroy such foreign elements, even when they are crucial to your survival. To stop this from happening, you must take anti-rejection drugs which weaken immunity, increasing your susceptibility to infectious disease. Most people are happy to accept the trade-off. Recipients of transplants still suffer the effects of organ rejection. Despite the existence and utility of these drugs, it's not just the drugs fail, although they sometimes do. It's more often because those prescribed the drugs do not take them. This beggars belief. It is seriously not good to have your kidneys fail. Dialysis is no picnic. Transplantation surgery occurs after long waiting at high risk and great expense. To lose all that because you don't take your medication, how could people do that to themselves? How could this possibly be? So there he just describes one situation where people are given the prescription that they need, but they are not actually following that advice. And it would be the same thing with somebody who wants to lose weight, but they're not following the advice of other people. It might be the same situation for somebody who wants to get out of debt, but they're not following a strict budget. And so one reason for that is simply discipline. We need to learn discipline. So in order to learn discipline, you have to find a disciplinary. You have to find a coach, somebody who you trust, who will guide you through that process. And then once you do that, you take those habits with you. Another reason for that might be depression, a lack of love for oneself. And so, in that circumstance, personal development and self awareness is very crucial. Going through meditative practices to uncover what is truly bothering you. In today's world, we live in a fast paced society where we are burdened with a lot of tasks. So, a lot of people are burying some insecurities, some frustrations, some things that are depressing them, and they're very, very deep. And because of that, the actions that they take are not healthy because of those deep, 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 deep psychological, you could say, impairments. And so once those impairments come to surface and you articulate ways to get over that, then the actions you take will be better. And that'll make you a better leader as well, because then you'll be able to care for others more. You know, if you think of, I see this happen a lot with people who have a divorce. So they had kids and then they got a divorce, and then now there's not as much love for the kids because, you know, a divorce is a depressing thing. And if it was a nasty divorce, then the side that was the victim might take it out on the kids and not love them properly and kind of give up on them because that significant other caused them a lot of trauma. Now they see that significant other in the children. They see it in their personality, they see it in their eyes, they see it in the way that they go about life is very similar to that significant other, so they take it out on them. So that's why it's important to fix yourself before fixing other people. And so Dr. Jordan Peterson goes on to say, but, and this is the amazing thing, imagine that it isn't you who feels sick, it's your dog. So you take him to the vet. The vet gives you a prescription. What happens then? You have just as many reasons to distrust a vet as a doctor. Furthermore, if you cared so little for your pet that you weren't concerned with what improper standard or error-ridden prescription he might be given, you wouldn't have taken him to the vet in the first place. Thus, you care. Your actions prove it. In fact, on average, you care more. People are better at filling and properly administering prescription medication to their pets than to themselves. That's not good. Even from your pet's perspective, it's not good. Your pet probably loves you and would be happier if you took your medication. It is difficult to conclude anything from this set of facts except that people appear to love their dogs, cats, ferrets, and birds, and maybe even their lizards more than themselves. How horrible is that? How much shame must exist for something like that to be true? What could it be about people that makes them prefer their pets to themselves? These are serious questions to answer. Serious questions to answer. But anyway, moving on to more important matters now that we've got that covered. On page 35, he goes on to say, the scientific world of matter can be reduced, in some sense, to its fundamental constituent elements, molecules, atoms, even quarks. However, the world of experience has primal constituents as well. These are the necessary elements whose interactions define drama and fiction. One of these is chaos, another is order. The third, as there are three, is the process that mediates between the two, which appears identical to what modern people call consciousness. It is our external subjugation to the first two that makes us doubt the validity of existence, that makes us throw up our hands in despair and fail to care for ourselves properly. It is proper understanding of the third that allows us the only real way out. Chaos is the domain of ignorance itself, its unexplored territory. Chaos is what extends, eternally and without limit, beyond the boundaries of all states, all ideas, and all disciplines. It's the foreigner, the stranger, the member of another gang, the rustle in the bushes in the nighttime, the monster under the bed, the hidden anger of your mother, and the sickness of your child. Chaos is the despair and horror you feel when you have been profoundly betrayed. It's the place you end up when things fall apart, when your dreams die, your career collapses, or your marriage ends. It's the underworld of fairy tale and myth, where the dragon and the gold it guards eternally coexist. Chaos is where we are when we don't know where we are and what we are doing, when we don't know what we are doing. It is, in short, all those things and situations we neither know nor understand. Chaos is also the formless potential from which the God of Genesis 1 called forth order using language at the beginning of time. It's the same potential from which we, made in that image, call forth the novel and ever changing moments of our lives. And chaos is freedom, dreadful freedom too. Order, by contrast, is explored territory. That's the hundreds of millions of years old hierarchy of place, position, and authority. That's the structure of society. It's the structure provided by biology, too, particularly insofar as you are adapted as you are to the structure of society. Order is tribe, religion, earth, home, and country. It's the warm, secure living room where the fireplace glows and the children play. It's the flag of the nation. It's the value of the currency. Order is the floor beneath your feet and your plan for the day. It's the greatness of tradition, the rows of desks in a classroom, the trains that leave on time, the calendar, and the clock. Order is the public facade we're called upon to wear, the politeness of a gathering of civilized strangers, and the thin ice of which we all skate. Order is the place where the behavior of the world matches our expectations and our desires, the place where all things turn out the way we want them to. But order is sometimes tyranny and stultification as well, when the demand for certainty and uniformity and purity becomes too one-sided. Where everything is certain, we're in order. We're there when things are going according to plan and nothing is new and disturbing. In the domain of order, things behave as God intended. We like to be there. Familiar environments are congenial. In order, we're able to think about things in the long term. There, things work and we're stable, calm, and competent. We seldom leave places we understand, geographical or conceptual. For that reason, we certainly do not like it when we are compelled to do or when it happens accidentally. All right, so I'm going to talk about here order and chaos. And what I'm going to describe next is how that ties in with the yin and yang symbol from the Taoist philosophy. And so everybody is familiar with the peace sign. You've got white on one end and you've got black on the other. And then on the white end, you also have a black dot in the middle, and on the black end, you also have a white dot in the middle. And so what that represents is wherever there is chaos, there is potential for order. And wherever there is order, there is a potential for chaos. And so when you think about that in the professional world, you can think about a doctor. Now, a doctor is always searching for the chaos, always searching for the potential harms, always searching in the future to reduce the possibilities to set the patient up properly. And the Taoist philosophy is to merge chaos and order and walk in the middle of the divine way. And so, if that doctor always lived within order, they would never look to the future possibility of illness. And so, this philosophy helps you to grow, helps you to become more mature, become more responsible. If you think about it from a soldier's perspective in a high intense combat zone, they're always on guard. They're always looking for potential threats. So although they don't see it right now, they see order when they look out into the world. There is nothing, but they're searching for the chaos, always on guard. If you think about a financial manager for a bank, always looking for chaos. The best and the brightest are going to be paid the most amount of money. They're going to be held in a high regard, and they're going to be the most useful to a team if they're looking forward. You know, if you think about it, a lot of people like to think of wolf packs. You have the leader who is either out in front or from the back, depending on what region of the wildlife they're going through. If they know that there's an enemy territory up ahead, they go out in front and they look for chaos. And if they think that they're just passing an enemy territory, they will trail behind and they'll make sure that none of the weaker members fall behind, but they're also there to make sure, of course, that they don't get attacked from the rear. And so we're going to piece together order and chaos. And in the next part, I'm going to tell you how this plays a role in politics today. And if you can understand this, then you can understand the economy, and then you can understand how politics is indoctrinating people into certain belief systems. And so, again, when we talk about that, the whole purpose of this is to get you in the middle so that you will be a free thinking individual and that you will not be swayed by indoctrination. Moving on, he says, chaos is the deep ocean bottom to which Pinocchio voyaged to rescue his father from Monstro, whale and breathing dragon. That journey into darkness and rescue is the most difficult thing a puppet must do if he wants to reel, if he wants to extract himself from the temptations of deceit and acting and victimization and impulsive pleasure and totalitarian subjugation, if he wants to take his place as genuine being in the world. Order is the stability of your marriage. It's buttressed by the traditions of the past and by your expectations, grounded, often invisibly, in those traditions. Chaos is that stability crumbling under your feet when you discover your partner's infidelity. Chaos is the experience of reeling unbound and unsupported through space when your guiding routines and traditions collapse. Okay, so let me backtrack for one moment and highlight a few of these sentences. He says that order is the stability of your marriage It's buttressed by the traditions of the past and by your expectations, grounded often invisibly in those traditions. So when you think about the political spectrum, on the left, you've got, on the far left, you've got communism, then you've got socialism, and then you've got liberalism. So that's how we've evolved over time, is we're kind of in a liberal state here in democratic states like New York, California, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and a few other ones that I forgot. And then on the right, you've got Nazism. Okay, so you pull that in a little bit farther, and then you've got conservatism. And that's kind of where we're at with Montana, Idaho, Texas, and then all the deep south states. And then you've got some states like Minnesota, Florida, Alaska, and I believe it was New Mexico. One of those states is in the middle. So they have found the basically perfect balance between the two. And so when you look at the economics of those states, you see that they're flourishing. And so anyway, back to order and chaos. Order is the traditions. So we know that conservatism is based on tradition. And we know that liberalism is open to new ideas. Okay? So there, when you understand the politics of each state, then you understand how people act within. What is the social behavior of people when they have certain opportunities? And so you say that conservative states move at a slower rate, meaning they are not designed to develop as quickly. But liberal states are designed to pour the funds into main ventures to increase the economy, to increase technology. Okay, so that is where chaos is. So you would say that um, chaos, why is it chaos? Why is a liberal state in chaos? You would say maybe that there's more control, right? Because you would say that a communist country has more control, the government has more control. But people in America do the opposite. So if there's more control, the social behavior means that there's actually more chaos. Why is that? It's because there's not a firm hierarchy. In a liberal state says that everyone is equal. So there's not as much order. So when everybody is equal, then people act in certain ways, but they're not actually qualified for that. So why is that chaotic? That's chaotic because people scam each other. Because everything is about money. And there's one reason why this is more than conservative states. Now, I want to make clear that I am not a liberal or a conservative. So this is not biased. It just is what it is. So the reason why New York and California produces people who are on the hustle, you would say they're on the hustle more. I hear a lot of people from other states, they say, wow, people in California really know how to hustle. They're hard workers. It's because in a communist state, the government is set up so you get more production out of people. Because if everyone feels like they're on the same level playing field, then they're in it together and you get more production out of it. And at the very, very top, there's a small portion of people who actually win. And so when they're winning, everybody sees that victory and they get the California or the New York dream. So everybody can see it. They see the victory in their life and they think that they're just, a year away from making a breakthrough and they're going to become famous. Okay? But that causes chaos because people will go to great lengths to make money to try to be in the same shoes as those actors or the actresses or the very, very top CEOs. And why is that? On an economic level, it's because liberal states are debt driven states. Everything is based on debt. And so the housing prices are increased and the banks own everything. People think they have freedoms, but they do not have freedoms in a communist, or if you don't want to take it to that extreme, a liberal state. There are more freedoms than, of course, China and Russia, but not nearly as much as people think. Okay, so that causes chaos. This is why in California, specifically San Francisco, there are a lot more rebellions, a lot more protests than other places around the world. Just about every single month, there's a new group of college students who are rebelling against something. Okay, so there's a lot of chaos because of the tax structure. More taxes, higher housing prices, and also from a dating perspective, there are not as many traditions within love. And so you see a lot more infidelity in liberal states. Okay, so then you go to a conservative state on the right side, which is more order. And that is because there are less taxes, there's less government intervention. So you would say, well, there's less government intervention. Wouldn't that mean that that would be more chaotic and less order? No, because people self-regulate themselves. They know that they have more freedoms, so they govern themselves more because there is a tradition of hierarchy. So what happens is people have more money because smaller government means less money going into government institutions and government programs. So you have more money to give to people. And the tax policy is less. So that means that more small businesses can thrive. Okay? And it's all based on the family. Okay? So it's all based on the family. That's why there's more houses, bigger houses. You look at Texas, a conservative state, one of the best real estate markets for housing. You get a 5,000 square foot house for $380,000. If you want a $380,000 house in California or New York or parts of Seattle or Hawaii, you've got to get a 100 square foot closet space. Okay, so it's all based on tradition, but with that, the development of certain programs are less. So that's the only negative impact of that. And so another reason why liberal states never work, socialism, communism never works, is the homeless population is way too high. You look at the list of top 10 places where there's the most homelessness, you're going to see California, you're going to see places in New York, and you're going to see places in Maryland, the Baltimore area. Why is that? Those are all liberal. So on one hand, on the right side, there is more poverty, but those people are in the low bracket. So if you think about on a chart here, the very wealthy elite, you say that's probably, 1% of the population. And then the upper middle class, you got about a 5 to, let's say, 10% chance of getting in the upper middle class in a liberal state. And then you got the middle class, which is becoming smaller and smaller with more inequality every single year. So you got about the same, about a 5 to 10% chance. And then lower middle class, you probably got about a 20% chance. And then the rest is, well, no, I'm not tracking the numbers on this. I'm not doing the math on it, but let's say you got about a 40% chance to get into the lower income bracket, and then whatever remaining percentage it is homelessness. All right, and then on the right side, there's more order, more hierarchy. So yeah, there might not be as many super wealthy people, right? Because why do the super wealthy people go to liberal states? Why does Donald Trump do business in liberal states? Why does Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk do business or Jeff Bezos do business in liberal states? Because they can take advantage. They can become way, 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 way more wealthy in liberal states than they can in conservative states, right? So conservative, you've got maybe 0.2% who are super elite. Maybe those are people who work in the oil fields in Texas and the rest of the deep south. And then you got about maybe a 15% chance of being in the upper middle class, maybe a 10 to 15% chance. And then a middle class, you got about a 30% chance, and or maybe a little bit less, maybe like 25. And then, you know, lower income, you got more. But is there homelessness? No, hardly any homelessness, because they take care of their people. So yes, there is poverty. That's a big argument that people will draw upon. They'll say, "Oh, well, there's more poverty." Well, yeah, but there's more homelessness, and there's also more drugs and crime, which causes chaos in liberal states. All right, and then if you get real deep into some of conspiracies, uh, which um, which is information that's brought upon by people who used to work in law enforcement, you see that drugs are actually being pumped into these places by different government organizations. Now, don't quote me on that, but when you look into it, it makes a lot of sense, because you got all these people and they make money off of it, and who cares? They fall through the cracks of society, and the communist state says, whatever, let them be. it's kind of like it's kind of like a video game, right? If you want to think about it, if you're having a hard time understanding it, think about a video game, and you've got two different scenarios that you have to go into. And then the rules of one game is set up this way, and the rules of the other is set up this way. All right. So then how people play in those scenarios is much, much different. People who play in a conservative society, they say, okay, the rules are in my favor more. I can focus on my family more. I can uphold familial traditions, and I don't have to work as much. I'm going to have a little bit more free time, and I'm going to have a little bit more say within the government. Okay. People they govern themselves more. Okay. And then you have people who go into the scenario on the left, and they say, well, the government has total control for the most part, so I don't have much of a say in the government. So I'm just going to focus on working, because I have to work, because if I want to get into a good house and I want to start a family, I have to work really, really, really hard. Really hard. On page 40, he goes on to say, order, the known, appears symbolically associated with masculinity, as illustrated in the aforementioned yang of the Taoist yin-yang symbol. This is perhaps because the primary hierarchical structure of human society is masculine, as it is amongst most animals, including the chimpanzees, who are our closest genetic and arguably behavioral match. It is because men are, and throughout history, have been the builders of towns and cities, the engineers, stonemasons, bricklayers, and lumberjacks, the operators of heavy machinery. Order is God, the Father, the eternal judge, ledger keeper and dispenser of rewards and punishments. Order is the peacetime army of policemen and soldiers. It's the political culture, the corporate environment, and the system. It's the they in you know what they say. It's credit cards, classrooms, supermarket checkout lineups, turn-taking traffic lights, and the familiar routes of daily commuters. Order, when pushed too far, when imbalanced, can also manifest itself destructively and terribly. It does so as the forced migration, the concentration camp, and the soul-devouring uniformity of the goose steppe. Chaos, the unknown, is symbolically associated with the feminine. This is partly because all the things we have come to know were born, originally, of the unknown, just as all beings we encounter were born of mothers. Chaos is matter, origin, source, mother, materia, the substance from which all things are made. It is also what matters, or what is the matter, the very subject matter of thought and communication. In its positive guise, chaos is possibility itself, the source of ideas, the mysterious realm of gestation and birth. As a negative force, it's the impenetrable darkness of a cave and the accident by the side of the road. It's the mother grizzly, all compassion to her cubs, who marks you as potential predator and tears you to pieces. Chaos, the eternal feminine, is also the crushing force of sexual selection. Women are choosy matters, unlike female chimps, their closest animal counterparts. Most men do not meet female human standards. It is for this reason that women on dating sites rate 85% of men as a below average in attractiveness. It is for this reason that we all have twice as many female ancestors as male. Imagine that all women who have ever lived have averaged one child. Now imagine that half the men who have ever lived have fathered two children, if they had any, while the other have fathered none. It is women as nature who looks at half of all men and says no. For the men, that's a direct encounter with chaos, and it occurs with devastating force every time they are turned down for a date. Human female choosiness is also why we are very different from the common ancestor we shared with our chimpanzee cousins, while the later are very much the same. Women's proclivity to say no more than other force has shaped our evolution into the creative, industrious, upright, large-brained, competitive, aggressive, domineering creatures that we are. It is nature as women who says, well, bucko, you're good enough for a friend, but my experience of you so far has not indicated the suitability of your genetic material for continued propagation. The most profound religious symbols rely for their power in large part on this underlying fundamentality by partisan conceptual subdivision. The Star of David is, for example, the downward pointing triangle of femininity and the upward pointing triangle of the male. It's the same for the yoni and lingam of Hinduism, which come covered with snakes, our ancient adversaries and provocateurs. The Shiva Linga is depicted with snake deities called the Nagas. The ancient Egyptians represented Osiris, god of the state, and Isis, goddess of the underworld, as twin cobras with their tails knotted together. The same symbol was used in China to portray Fuxi and Nua, creators of humanity and of writing. The representations in Christianity are less abstract, more like personalities, but the familiar Western images of the Virgin Mary with the Christ child and the Pieta both express the female-male dual unity, as does the traditional insistence on the androgen of Christ. It should also be noted, finally, that the structure of the brain itself at a gross morphological level appears to reflect this duality. This, to me, indicates the fundamental, beyond the metaphorical reality of this symbolically feminine-masculine divide, since the brain is adapted by definition to reality itself. That is, reality conceptualized in this quasi-Darwinian manner. Elkahonen Goldberg, a student of the great Russian neuropsychologist Alexander Luria, has proposed quite lucidly and directly that the very hemispheric structure of the cortex reflects the fundamental division between novelty, the unknown or chaos, and the routinization, the known order. He doesn't make reference to the symbols representing the structure of the world in reference to this theory, but that's all the better. And an idea is more credible when it emerges as a consequence of investigations in different realms. And so again, when a lot of people have debates about political arguments, they often jump on board with certain belief systems because they are indoctrinated. And it's even in the political science literature that people usually take on the political belief that their adults, their parents take on. Okay, so this is part of the problem when ignorant people talk about politics, because then what happens is they try to go and argue with all their friends and influence all their friends, but they really don't know the core, the heart of the matter. And so chaos and order both are wrong. And so when you look at states like Florida, you can use that as a model. Right in the middle, right in the middle, they're right in the middle. Even Minnesota. Okay, a lot of people will say Minnesota is not that great because of the weather. But putting the weather factor out of the equation, you say that Minnesota people are the most healthy people. They have one of the best healthcare systems with the Mayo Clinic. They're the most educated population. Now, partly because of the weather, because in the wintertime there's not a whole lot of things to do, so they stay indoors, but because of the policies in place, which differentiates them from other cold weather states. And the economy is set up mainly for the middle class. So although there's not a whole lot of people who are getting extremely wealthy, there's about, maybe 0.5% of people who are above, 100 million net revenue, but there is way more wealth equality for upper middle class and lower class. And there's absolutely no homeless population, of course, that wouldn't survive in the wintertime. And the drugs there is almost non-existent. Okay. And I think a lot of people realize that they don't like liberal states even more than they don't like conservative states once they realize how much they've been fooled. So this is sort of a dose of reality, the red pill. I want you to think about why entertainment is more popular in New York and more popular in California. Because without entertainment, people would not be distracted enough to realize that they are absolute slaves in a debt driven economy. So there's this impression that the dream is real. You are sold on the dream. But the dream does not belong to you. You are an observer of the dream. You are a slave so that other people can have the dream. And that is the ugly truth. And that can be the truth for any society, but it is mainly the truth. It has more weight in a liberal society. That's why there's Hollywood in California. Okay, they say everybody is equal. There's no hierarchy, so people can act how they want. Okay, we're gonna rip them off completely from getting any financial independence, but at least we're gonna let them act how they want. We're gonna give them that. And so they say that individualism is expressed more in liberal states. Be who you want, dress how you want, there's no judgment. In fact, we're gonna promote that through movies, and we're gonna use massive psychological conditioning through marketing campaigns in all of this entertainment industry. And we're going to get people to believe in that in California. We're going to keep them happy. We're going to do that in New York with Broadway. We're going to keep them happy. They can express their personality more. You see people in California, New York, they're so expressive. They have such good personalities. You're a CEO of a business and you walk into a barber and you guys shoot the shit as if you're best friends. You're on the same level playing field because you're all in it together. So there is that positive upside because it's reverse psychology. It's we're going to give you the impression that you are free and you are about to get this dream, but you don't have it. You don't have it. About 1% of the population who live in $300 million houses have it. Everybody else lives in old, small housing. Okay? It's a tough truth to come to terms with. All right? Then on the other hand, on the conservative side, we've got people who are not as expressive. They're very much rooted in tradition and the family values, and they're very much self-conscious of what they wear. So that can be a negative part of it. You could say that they're not as expressive, but typically they're just focused on their mission because they see that they actually have a higher potential of moving up and having more power and influence in the society. When you have a hierarchy, which is based on order and tradition, you know what you need to do, you work hard for that, and you move up. You aren't distracted by all these distractions. Okay? But again, that's not the best scenario. Right in the middle is the best scenario of them both. Right? That's where free thinkers are. That's where true intellectuals are. They don't get swayed from either side. As soon as you get swayed from either side, you start believing in things simply because that's what groupthink says, that's what all my friends say, that's what everybody in my family believes. But that's negative. And so they say that you can neuroscience is actually trying to pinpoint the brain activity of people with different belief systems, and that's all ran by CIA organizations so that they can influence people better. They're trying to find just the right recipe so they can influence people better. And so you break down the left and the right hemisphere, and you say left is order and analytical, and you say right is more open for interpretation, a little bit more creative. And so neuroscientists are starting to piece that in with politics, because the left side, again, the structure, communism at the extreme end, liberalism, total control, almost total control, analytical. Okay, you think of the technology industry booming, San Francisco. Everybody is everybody's kept busy. It's a debt-ridden society. Everybody's kept busy. They don't have time to think of the world. They don't have time to think on the right side. And they're saying that conservatism is linked with the right hemisphere of the brain. Okay, this is neuroscience. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to piece that together. And I think that, rationally speaking, government is control on, government is a form of control. And so I would say no matter what side of it you're on, it's always going to be more left-brained. However, they're saying that on the right side of it, there's more interpretation for people to think about the world a little bit more. You think about the states where religion is popular, that's more right-brained, very rooted in the tradition of theological thinking, maybe a little bit more philosophy. Here's a good example, because I know that it doesn't make total sense. It's still science that they're trying to research. But think about it this way, all right? What are right wing countries? Italy is a right wing country. So you say, what do Italians value? Language, love, culture, tradition, fashion. So you say that's more right brained. You say, okay, well, what is a left wing country? China. What does China believe in? Technology, mathematics, science, structure, high rises with everybody packed together in smart cities. Is one better than the other? That's up for interpretation, but that's how it's divided in left brain, right brain. Many things begin to fall into place when you begin to consciously understand the world in this manner. It's as if the knowledge of your body and soul falls into alignment with the knowledge of your intellect. And there's more. Such knowledge is prescriptive as well as descriptive. This is the kind of knowing what that helps you know how. This is the kind of is from which you can derive an ought. The Taoist juxtaposition of yin and yang, for example, doesn't simply portray chaos and order as the fundamental elements of being. It also tells you how to act. The way, the Taoist path of life, is represented by, or exists on, the border between the twin serpents. The way is the path of proper being. It's the same way as that referred to by Christ in John 14:6. I am the way and the truth and the life. The same idea is expressed in Matthew 7:14. Because strait is the gate and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. We eternally inhabit order surrounded by chaos. We eternally occupy known territory surrounded by the unknown. We experience meaningful engagement when we mediate appropriately between them. We are adapted in the deepest Darwinian sense, not to the world of objects, but to the meta-realities of order and chaos, yin and yin. Chaos and order make up the eternal, transcendent environments of the living. To straddle that fundamental duality is to be balanced, to have one foot firmly planted in order and security and the other in chaos, possibility, growth, and adventure, when life suddenly reveals itself as intense, gripping, and meaningful. When time passes, and so you're engrossed in what you're doing, you don't notice. It is there and then that you are located precisely on the border between order and chaos. The subjective meaning that we encounter there is the reaction of our deepest being, our neurologically and evolutionary grounded instinctive self, indicating that we are ensuring the stability, but also the expansion of habitable, productive territory of space that is personal, social, and natural. It's the right place to be in every sense. You are there when and where it matters. That's what music is telling you, too, when you are listening, even more perhaps when you're dancing, when it's harmonious, layered patterns of predictability and unpredictability making meaning itself well up from the most profound depths of your being. Now, one of the most interesting seminars that I've ever watched was of a teacher of astrotheology. And so um, that is applying astrology and theology and philosophy all together. And it was phenomenal how astrology is in the Bible. And the principles are in a lot of philosophy as well. Socrates, Aristotle, all of those guys were learning about the stars. And that also pertains to the human body. And so you say there are different parts of your body that line up with different astrological signs. Okay, so you start off with Aries, the ram, which is your head. And then you go down to Taurus, which I think he said was the throat. And then you go down to Gemini, to your shoulders, which is two sides, two arms. And then you go to Cancer, oh yeah, Cancer was the chest, the crab's shell. And then you go to Leo, which rules the heart. And then you go down to Virgo, I can't remember them off the top of my head, actually. I should have looked that up first. And the whole point of that is he says that a lot of people think religion is about Jesus coming from the heavens. He thinks that the people who go to church believe that an actual person is going to come down and descend from the sky and just save the world. That's what the preachers and pastors are teaching. But the meaning of astrotheology, which is phenomenal, is that the ascension into heaven is through you, through your own body, into your God consciousness, into your enlightened state of being, into the activation of your pineal gland. And I know how that sounds to somebody who's never thought about this, who's never been taught. You have been indoctrinated. Okay, this is part of, chaos and order. You don't want to be on either side. You want to be right in the middle to activate the pineal gland so that you see things for how they are and you're not just simply pressured into things. And so what this teacher of astrotheology was saying is that when you practice semen retention, semen is built out of minerals. And he says that the ascension into heaven is where those minerals and that semen goes up through your spinal cord and up through Jacob's ladder into heaven. Okay. Now, of course, that's on the extreme end. That's what monks would do. But you can still activate that without going through that whole process. His teaching was for the people who wanted to experience it on the 100% activation. The problem is when you look at monks, they're not action takers for the most part. A lot of them just sit back and think. So that might not be the best case scenario. But that's where religion is teaching you wrong. It's teaching you to look outside of yourself, but you got to look inside of yourself, inside of your beliefs, and it activates more dormant brain cells. I know a lot of people are going to reject this, but you do the research. People at Stanford and Harvard are doing the research on this too. And I'm not saying that that's something that you should do, but it's what the best intellectuals in history have done. You look at Nikola Tesla, completely celibate. Einstein, completely celibate. Okay, now give it. These guys had Asperger's, or they say that they were on the spectrum, so they weren't really motivated by sex. And Steve Jobs as well. He had sex with his girlfriend, but he didn't actually release. So he was practicing to become more fully enlightened. Steve Jobs went on a spiritual quest to India before he started his company. He learned from the best and brightest. And he was taking a little bit of LSD as well, which helped him to expand his consciousness and think more creatively outside of the structure that we have been indoctrinated in. And through that, he came back, and then what happened? Okay, so of course, some of that it sounds a little bit foreign to certain people, but when you talk to people who have gone on that enlightened path, you realize that they are some of the smartest and wisest people ever. They do not care about left and right beliefs. They see things for what they are. And he goes on to say on page 48, in any case, there's a serpent in the garden, and he's a subtile beast, according to the ancient story, difficult to see, vaporous, cunning, deceitful, and treacherous. It therefore comes as no surprise when he decides to play a trick on Eve. Why Eve instead of Adam? It could just be chance. It was 50-50 for Eve, statistically speaking, and those are pretty high odds. But I've learned that these old stories contain nothing superfluous. Anything accidental, anything that does not serve the plot, has long been forgotten in the telling. As the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov advised, If there is a rifle hanging on the wall in Act 1, it must be fired in the next act. Otherwise, it has no business being there. Perhaps primordial Eve had more reason to attend to serpents than Adam. Maybe they were more likely, for example, to prey on her tree-dwelling infants. Perhaps it is for this reason that Eve's daughters are more protective, self-conscious, fearful, and nervous. To this day, even and especially in the most egalitarian of modern human societies. In any case, the serpent tells Eve that if she eats the forbidden fruit, she won't die. Instead, her eyes will be opened. She will become like God, knowing good from evil. Of course, the serpent doesn't let her know she will be like God in only that one way. But he is a serpent after all. Being human and wanting to know more, Eve decides to eat the fruit. Poof! She wakes up, she's conscious, or perhaps self-conscious for the first time. Now, a lot of people, and I used to be in the same category, read religious texts and they don't see in between the lines. You know, modern day science is designed to give you a logical answer. It's proven, this is what we see, this is the answer. Philosophy, theology is all about the hidden meaning behind it. And so in some circumstances, it requires that you think completely differently than what a logical science or scientist would think as. And so the meaning behind this, and I'll read it again, is that in any case, the serpent tells Eve that if she eats the forbidden fruit, she won't die. Instead, her eyes will be opened. She will become like God, knowing good from evil. Of course, the serpent doesn't let her know she will be like God in only that one way. But he is a serpent, after all. Being human and wanting to know more, Eve decides to eat the fruit. Poof, she wakes up, she's conscious, or perhaps self-conscious for the first time. That is the meaning of red pill. She becomes conscious. And you're going to start to see this piece together as I read this. A red pill, somebody who takes the red pill sees life not through a lens of fairy tale, not through the lens of a little child, but through the lens of an experienced, wise adult who sees the potential harms in the world and knows that wherever there is order, there is also chaos. They're not naive to that fact. So in this, the serpent represents chaos, it represents evil, it represents unknown. And so Eve is woken by the unknown. For the very first time, she sees that life is not full of happiness. She sees for the first time that there is threats. So she sees evil, encounters evil for the very first time. Okay, that's what this means. So her consciousness is woken when she encounters the serpent. All right, so now no clear seeing conscious woman is going to tolerate an unawakened man. So Eve immediately shares the fruit with Adam that makes him self-conscious. Little has changed. Okay, before I start, she shares the fruit with Adam. Now, it's said that women usually mature faster than men. Why is that? Is it because men are not as smart? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. They're just we're organized in different ways up to a certain age. Why is that? It's because of reproduction. Women, once they go through puberty, are ready for reproduction. And that's been that way all the way back in history when women started having children at 14 years old. So what did I say earlier? We said that you don't become responsible until you have to care for somebody else. So at that age, women are already starting to think differently than men. They're starting to think as if they're taking care of their babies. And they're testing men from that age. They're starting to think of men as potential partners for reproduction. So they're thinking in that way. Okay. And so women are always putting pressure on men. They're trying to manifest the most out of young men to prepare them for becoming a father, for growing up. Okay, this is why, when people think about dating, they think that dating is all about, having as much sex as possible, and that's what the new age is pushing on everybody, through different reality TV shows, which is the easiest way to become an idiot. Dating is meant to get the most out of you. You don't even have to necessarily have sex or any romantic relations to get the most out of dating. Because when you date, you meet, it's the same thing in The Lion King, right? Simba and what's her name? Nala, I believe, go out playing. And Nala pins Simba, who is little. And she's looking into his eyes, testing him to grow up. Because she sees that he's capable of more. Okay, so it's the same thing. And eventually Simba, he pouts for a little bit, but eventually he comes to his senses and realizes that Nala is trying to do him a favor. And so it's the same thing with women. They test men because they see the potential in them, and men reciprocate in the same way. And it's vice versa too. Men get the same out of women, and they motivate them the same way. But it's more so that women do it to men because they're looking for potential partners to reproduce with from roughly 14 to 28, maybe 30. It's the primary role of women. Okay, on a very primal level, it's the primary role. Okay, so when you study psychology, everything, all of the actions that they take is filtered through that primal sense of being. Everything they're doing is to attract the right partner. When you look at the underlying reason, that is why. Okay, maybe not everything, but major things. Okay, so in this scenario, Eve shares the fruit with Adam, and it makes him self-conscious. Why is he self-conscious? Because the same thing with Eve, he now sees that there's potential harm in the world. So little has changed. Women have been making men self-conscious since the beginning of time. They do this primarily by rejecting them, but they also do it by shaming them if men do not take responsibility. I'm going to stop here, and this is a little bit of dating advice. A loser's mentality going into dating is fear of rejection, because they are not looking at dating the right way. So people who are less developed are going to look at dating purely for sex. And so they're afraid of getting rejected because they don't want to make a fool of themselves. But a winner's attitude is, I'm going to go into this relationship. I'm going to go and talk to that person to learn from them, because that person is a reflection of who I am. Okay, so women reject men. Okay, now most women don't just flat out reject men in a disgusting way unless men are being, completely out of line. But she's rejecting men to get the most out of them, saying what we talked about before, saying you're not quite there yet, you're not quite enough for me to be interested in reproducing for you or with you at this point in time, but somebody else would. So how is that motivating? That's motivating because if you're a winner, you reflect on that and you say, well, maybe that's my fault. Maybe there's something I could do. Maybe I'm not living up to my fullest potential. It says women shame men. Women shame men. They're trying to manifest the most out of them to prepare them for adulthood. They're shaming them when they're not living up to their responsibilities. Okay, that doesn't mean to, completely bow down to it, but it means to wake up to the fact that that's there to help you, to get the most out of you. Since women bear the, or let me back up. He says they do this primarily by rejecting them, but they also do it by shaming them if men do not take responsibility. Since women bear the primary burden of reproduction, it's no wonder. It is very hard to see how it could be otherwise. But the capacity of women to shame men and render them self-conscious is still a primal force of nature. Now, you may ask, what in the world have snakes got to do with vision? Well, first, it's clearly some importance to see them because they might prey on you, particularly when you're little and live in trees like our arboreal ancestors. So, like I said before, modern day scientists are going to give you a logical answer, but theology is going to make you read between the lines. So, I gave you the answer for why the serpent, what the serpent represented. It represented the unknown, the chaos. But this is the logical answer. Dr. Lynn Isbell, professor of anthropology and animal behavior at the University of California, suggested that the stunningly acute vision almost uniquely possessed by human beings was an adaptation forced on us tens of millions of years ago by the necessity of detecting and avoiding the terrible dangers of snakes, with whom our ancestors co-evolved. This is perhaps one of the reasons the snake features in the Garden of Paradise as the creature who gave us the vision of God, in addition to serving as the primordial eternal enemy of mankind. This is perhaps one of the reasons why Mary, the eternal archetypal mother, Eve, perfected, is so commonly shown in the medieval and Renaissance iconography, holding the Christ child in the air as far away as possible from a predatory reptile which she has firmly pinned under her foot. And there's more. It's fruit that the snake offers, and fruit is also associated with a transformation of vision, in that our ability to see color is an adaptation that allows us to rapidly detect the ripe and therefore edible bounty of trees. Our primordial parents hearkened to the snake. They ate the fruit. Their eyes opened. They both awoke. You might think, as Eve did initially, that this would be a good thing. Sometimes, however, half a gift is worse than none. Adam and Eve wake up, all right, but only enough to discover some terrible things. First, they notice that they're naked. All right, let me back up here and talk about, so in this paragraph, there was a mixture of logical and theological answers. And so you can see this is perhaps one of the reasons why Mary, the eternal archetypal mother Eve, perfected, is so commonly shown in medieval and Renaissance iconography, holding the Christ child in air as far away as possible from the predatory reptile which she has firmly pinned under her foot. So you get imagery of that in your mind's eye, and you think of a woman holding up a baby in air with a snake under her foot. What does that represent? That represents the mother knowing, living within the middle of chaos and order, having eaten the fruit of the tree of life, knowing that the world is full of potential harms, holding the child away from the snake under her foot, which means that she is detecting and protecting the child from the snake. The snake represents evil, it represents chaos, represents the unknown. Why can't the child fend themselves? In human development, children need to be away from violence or chaos as much as possible in order to be the most productive and healthy in the long term. Because what you're going to see is if children are exposed to chaos early on, then their outlook and philosophy on life is always going to be rooted in more pessimism. So when you think of the yin and yang symbol, their way of thinking is going to be more in the chaos side rather than in the middle. So they're going to have a skewed perception on life. And that's not negative. That's not bad. You can always fix it. But it is what it is, and it needs to be realized in order to get your fullest potential. And it's the same way on the other side. If that child has been overly protected and they grow up in order for far too long, then one experience with chaos is going to completely undo their world, and they're not going to be able to go out and become as successful as they want to and they'll be bulldozed over by people who know the realities of life. Okay, so the last sentence in this was first, they notice that they're naked. Okay, so they have just woken up, they have consciousness, and they're realizing that they're naked. And that leaves them on the next page. He says, in their vulnerability, now fully realized, they felt unworthy to stand before God, meaning they felt self-conscious because they realized that they are not ready to bear the burden of life being naked. So they have to act to get the right resources now for their own survival. So he says, if you can't identify with that sentiment, you're just not thinking. Beauty shames the ugly, strength shames the weak, death shames the living, and the ideal shames us all. Thus we fear it, resent it, even hate it. And of course, that's the theme next examined in Genesis, in the story of Cain and Abel. What are we to do about that? Abandon all ideals of beauty, health, brilliance, and strength? That's not a good solution. That would merely ensure that we would feel ashamed all the time, and that we would even more justly deserve it. I don't want women who can stun by their mere presence to disappear just so that others can feel unself-conscious. I don't want intellect such as John von Neumann's to vanish just because of my barely grade 12 grasp of mathematics. By the time he was 19, he had redefined numbers. Numbers. Thank God for John von Neumann. Thank God for Grace Kelly and Anita Ekberg and Monica Bellucci. I'm proud to feel unworthy in the presence of people like that. It's the price we all pay for aim, achievement, and ambition, but it's also no wonder that Adam and Eve covered themselves up. The next part of the story is downright farcical, in my opinion, although it's also tragic and terrible. That evening, when Eden cools down, God goes out for his evening stroll, but Adam is absent. This puzzles God, who is accustomed to walking with him. Adam calls God, apparently forgetting that he can see through bushes. Where are you? Adam immediately reveals himself, but badly. First as a neurotic, then as a ratfink. The creator of all the universe calls, and Adam replies, I heard you, God, but I was naked and hid. What does this mean? It means that people, unsettled by their vulnerability, eternally fear to tell the truth, to mediate between chaos and order, and to manifest their destiny. In other words, they are afraid to walk with God. That's not particularly admirable, perhaps, but it's certainly understandable. God's a judgmental father. His standards are high. He's hard to please. Let me stop there. What does God represent? God represents the sun. In all ancient cultures and society, God has always represented the sun. Easter is the rise of sun, where the birth of sun. The that's where the days become longer, and Christmas is the absolute death of the sun. That is where winter and the darkness is the longest. And so when he says, when Eden cools down, God goes out for his evening stroll. The sun is setting, but Adam is not there. This puzzles God, who is accustomed to walking with. Adam calls God, apparently forgetting that he can see through bushes. Where are you? And then moving on a little bit farther, it says, what does this mean? It means that people, unsettled by their vulnerability, eternally fear to tell the truth. So why were Adam and Eve vulnerable? Because they were naked. Why were they self-conscious? Because of that. Because the sun was shining. They were seeing each other for the first time. So moving on, he says, God says, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat something you weren't supposed to? And Adam, in his wretchedness, points right at Eve, his love, his partner, his soulmate, and snitches on her. And then he blames God. He says, "The woman whom you gave to me, she gave it to me, and then I ate it." How pathetic and how accurate. The first woman made the first man self-conscious and resentful. Then the first man blamed the woman, and then the first man blamed God. This is exactly how every spurned male feels to this day. First, he feels small in front of the potential object of his love after she denigrates his reproductive suitability. Then he curses God for making her so bitchy, himself so useless. If he has had any sense, and being itself so deeply flawed, then he turns to the thoughts of revenge. How thoroughly contemptible and how utterly understandable. At least the woman had the serpent to blame. And it later turns out that snake is Satan himself, unlikely as that seems. Thus we can understand and sympathize with Eve's error. She was deceived by the best, but Adam, no one forced his words from his mouth. Okay, let me stop there again. It says the first woman made the first man self-conscious and resentful. Adam was resentful because Eve was preparing him to have the first child born in the world. In this story, Adam and Eve are everybody's parents. They were the ones that started the human evolution cycle, according to the story. So he goes on to say, then the first man blamed the woman because he was becoming resentful. You can see that with relationships, some people might find out that they jumped the gun too much. Why are the divorce rates so high? A lot of that is because of societal pressure for people to get into relationships. And this is why I talked about in the last video that you should use astrology to figure out the best possible outcome for the long-term success of your relationship, which will in turn lower the potential for divorce, which will in turn create a more positive family environment. If you look at astrology and you look at the signs and you look at people who are getting into relationships right now and you ask them sincerely, tell me the truth, maybe you're friends with them and they will tell you, do you actually get along with each other? They will say no. So why are they doing it? Because of sex. Okay? So this is one negative way that naive women can pressure men the wrong way. If in that reproductive cycle, she is ready to start and settle down and have a family, and she has a man that she is attracted, but they are not compatible, she will use sex as a way to control the man. And if that man is naive enough and does not understand it, then he will sacrifice himself for the woman. They will get married, they will have children, and then most likely they will become divorced later on, or they will have struggles in their relationship. You have one life, one opportunity to create a stable family. Why wouldn't you want the best possible outcome? Why wouldn't you want to start a family with people who you actually like? It just boggles my mind when I talk to some of my friends, yes, some of my buddies, and then I look at these astrology signs because I've wanted to do some research to see if it's actually accurate, and it's absolutely true. So why are you doing that? You don't even like her. You're becoming a slave to her, and she's using you. So then you're just going to go out and work. You're going to be the person who provides all the money to support the family, but she doesn't even like you personally. So this is something, and I don't think a lot of women truly understand it because they are just so excited or they're pressured to start a family because they think that, you know, society says that that's the right thing to do. And, that is the woman's part in life. It's her basic primal role in life is to continue humanity. Okay, so that's one way that you reduce resentment within your partner. So moving on, he says, well, I'm not going to go through it, but he basically describes the uh, the potential conflict that they go through when he says, then he curses God for making her so bitchy, himself so useless, if he has any sense, and being itself so deeply flawed. In any relationship, you're going to have ups and downs. But if you're in a relationship with your best friend, somebody who you're compatible with, you're going to be able to get through the downs. Because when, you know, somebody messes up, you're going to be bound together by true love, actual love. But when something goes wrong with somebody that you're not compatible with, you're not going to be bound by that love. You're going to give up. You're going to throw in the cards and you're going to look for somebody new. So moving on, he says, unfortunately, the worst isn't over for man or beast. First, God curses the serpent, telling him that he will now have to slither around legless, forever in peril of being stomped on by angry humans. Second, he tells the woman that she will now bring forth children in sorrow and desire an unworthy, sometimes resentful man who will in consequence lord her biological fate over her permanently. What might this mean? It could just mean that God is a patriarchal tyrant, as politically motivated interpretations of the ancient story insist. I think it's merely descriptive. Merely, and here is why. Okay, let me stop here for a second and say that when God curses the serpent, telling him that he will now have to slither around legless, forever in peril of being stomped on by angry humans. Remember, God is representing the sun who is now shining light on evil, the chaos, the serpent. So he's saying that now that I have started to shine my light and I'm watching over Adam and Eve, you, Satan, are now in forever peril of being stomped on by angry humans because they are now awakened and alert to the potential harms. So, as human beings evolved, the brains that eventually gave rise to self consciousness expanded tremendously. This produced an evolutionary arms race between fetal head and female pelvis. The female graciously widened her hips, almost to the point where running would no longer be possible. The baby, for his part, allowed himself to be born more than a year early compared to other mammals of his size and evolved a semi collapsible head. This was and is a painful adjustment for both. The essentially fetal baby is almost completely dependent on his mother for everything during that first year. The programmability of his massive brain means that he must be trained until he is 18 or 30 before being pushed out of the nest. This is to say nothing of the woman's consequential pain in childbirth and high risk of death for mother and infant alike. This all means that women pay a high price for pregnancy and child rearing, particularly in the early stages, and that one of the inevitable consequences is increased dependence upon the sometimes unreliable and always problematic good graces of men. After God tells Eve what is going to happen now that she has awakened, he turns to Adam, who, along with his male descendants, doesn't get off any easier. God says something akin to this: man, because you've attended to the woman, your eyes have been opened. Your godlike vision, granted to you by snake, fruit, and lover, allows you to see far, even into the future. That's the most important line that confirms what I said. He said, "Man, because you attended to the woman, your eyes have been opened." Meaning the woman has now manifested more out of you, pulled you into adulthood, into responsibility of reproduction, to become a father, to become one with your highest consciousness, to become one with Father, with God, to look after others for their survival, to become more responsible, to look far and wide. That's what he says. Your godlike vision granted to you by Snake, fruit and lover, allows you to see far, even into the future. I mean, I want you to truly reflect on that. When you got into a good relationship, what happened? You started having thoughts about the future, positive thoughts, right? But when that didn't happen, what happened? You started getting into fights with people, you started being reckless, drinking too much, drinking your sorrows away, not having any meaning, right? Now, I'm not saying that, you know, this is happening for everybody, but this is one reason why men go into self-destruction. And it can be the same way for women if they're not getting love and attention. But women have the tendency to work together as a collective. So they pair together. Men will go off on their own and they'll suffer in silence. Why? Because they're not seeing the godlike vision granted to you by the snake of which had enlightened the woman, who then in turn had enlightened the man. They say that the man, or what do they say? They say, in order to run your empire, you have to find the one woman, not the women, the one woman. But along the way, certain women will help you to become certain. That's why women work as a collective. They work as a collective all the way from the day that you're born. If you're born in the right family, your grandmother, your mother, all are supposed to manifest the most out of you. They play the nurturing role, and the men are supposed to go out and do something about it. Okay? But those who see into the future can also eternally see trouble coming. You're becoming more of a leader. You're thinking of others before yourself, and must then prepare for all contingencies and possibilities. To do that, you will have to eternally sacrifice the present for the future. You must put aside pleasure for security. In short, you will have to work, and it's going to be difficult. I hope you're fond of thorns and thistles, because you're going to grow a lot of them. And then God banishes the first man and the first woman from paradise, out of infancy, out of the unconscious animal world, into the horrors of history itself. And then he puts cherubim and flaming sword at the gate of Eden, just to stop them from eating the fruit of the tree of life. That in particular appears rather mean-spirited. Why not just make the poor humans immortal right away, particularly if that is your plan for the ultimate future anyways, as the story goes? But who would dare to question God? Perhaps heaven is something you must build, and immortality something you must earn. So this again, heaven is something you must build. Some people will go to church and they will think that the answers are up in the sky, and that there's this being that is going to come down and give them the answer. Okay, heaven is what you make out of it. If you hear the term heaven on earth, you bring heaven on earth through your actions by looking after other people. Or if you bring hell on earth, that's also through your actions. Okay? Now again, I'm not claiming that there's not a God. Okay, I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying what the story is teaching. Okay, I'm not I'm not saying there isn't a spiritual realm out there. Moving on page 58, he says, if we wish to take care of ourselves properly, we would have to respect ourselves, but we don't, because we are, not least in our own eyes, fallen creatures. If we lived in truth, if we spoke the truth, then we could walk with God once again and respect ourselves and others and the world. Then we might treat ourselves like people we cared for. We might strive to set the world straight. We might orientate it toward heaven, where we would want people we cared for to dwell, instead of hell, where our resentment and hatred would eternally sentence everyone. All right. Now, I'm going to share a personal story with you to confirm how I know all of this is true, which is pretty cool because I didn't even think about reading this book because of this experience. I just so happened to read the book and it aligned with what I had previously learned. So it was confirmation. Um, when I learned from that astrotheologist, I actually practiced that celibacy for about 3 months. And that was pretty much the purest time of my life where I was eating completely clean, no preservative foods, no alcohol, no sex, nothing. Okay. And what happened was I started to nurture myself. I started to play the masculine and the feminine role to myself. I was aligned more with myself. And I was also looking after other people more. Okay, so that's the positive aspect of it, is you become one with yourself. And the reason why I'm sharing that is because when you look at satanic cults and groups, they want to fight for freedom of religion. They think that everything is evil, or they think that everything is equal, but it's not. Because the people who practice that sort of behavior practice destructive ways of being. They bring hell onto earth. I'm not trying to be judgmental because maybe there are some who have good intentions, but the leaders of it and the whole teachings of it are hell on earth. So when you get real deep into that and you look at Satanism, with skull and bones, fraternal societies where the politicians go through that and then they get put into positions of power, that is so that they don't feel as bad when they have to send people into war to get killed, because they are the leaders. They're manifesting hell on earth with their orders for war. So that's why Satanism is bad, but Satanism is what the leaders focus on. Okay, so I'm gonna end this off where he basically ends this chapter motivationally to end on a good note, because we touched a lot of ugly truths. And so he says, in my clinical practice, I encourage people to credit themselves and those around them for acting productively and with care, as well as for the genuine concern and thoughtfulness they manifest towards others. People are so tortured by the limitations and constraint of being that I am amazed they ever act properly or look beyond themselves at all, but enough to do so that we have central heat and running water and infinite computational power and electricity, and enough for everyone to eat, and even the capacity to contemplate the fate of broader society, nature, terrible nature itself. All that complex machinery that protects us from freezing and starving and dying from lack of water tends unceasingly towards malfunction through entropy, and is also the constant attention of careful people that keeps it working so unbelievably well. Some people degenerate into the hell of resentment and the hatred of being, but most refuse to do so despite their suffering, disappointments, and losses, and inadequacies and ugliness. And again, that is a miracle for those with the eyes to see. All right, so the point of it is to be conscious, to be confident, to be secure in yourself, so that you don't have to be resentful of others. This is very common amongst chaotic societies. Communist societies cause resentment. So that's the lesson.